my name is Alia Sadi, and I'm a Ca' Foscari student at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. I am joined by my housemate, Noor Al-Amin. We're also joined by our friend, Santiago Alarcon, and we will be talking about Amitav Ghosh's book, Gun Island. We're actually super excited to have him today because we are discussing a text that we have been studying in a course taught by Professor Charles Bassi from February 2020 to May 2020. And we're super excited because he is one of the most prolific writers and the most relevant in this particular era. So welcome, Amitav Ghosh.
Hello, Alia. Hello, Noor. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you.
Hello, and my name is Noor Amin, and I'm from Lebanon, and I'm a student at Ca' Foscari University. I would like to start by introducing our guest today, Amitav Ghosh. So, Amitav Ghosh was born in Calcutta and grew up in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. He studied in Delhi, Oxford, and Alexandria, and is the author of the books The Circle of Reason, The Shadow Lines, In an Antique Land, Dancing in Cambodia, The Calcutta Chromosome, The Glass Palace, The Hungry Tide, and the Abyss trilogy consisting of Sea of Poppies, River of Smoke, and Flood and Fire. His work has been translated to more than 30 languages. And his most recent books are the ones that we actually studied, are The Great Derangement, Climate Change, and The Unthinkable, a work of nonfiction that was published in 2016. And the second book is Gun Island, a novel that was published in 2019. After this short introduction, I'd like to move to our first question, which is related to our current situation. So in this course, we started in the classroom, but then we moved to study online. And as for you, you were experiencing lockdown in both in India and New York. I would like to hear a little bit about your experience during this time of lockdown.
Sure. Well, I was actually in Venice until the 31st of January. And I was in the Veneto till the 2nd of February, by which time actually we now know that the COVID influenza was spreading everywhere. I came back to the US on the 4th of February. And actually here, the lockdown didn't really start till the 20th of March. So you said, as you said, I divide my time between India and the US. And these two countries are the countries that have perhaps most badly mishandled the COVID pandemic. It's really, in India, the situation is going from bad to worse every single day. I'm in constant touch with my family over there. What has happened, in India, again, they were very late in declaring a lockdown. And when they did, it was done so badly with so little warning that literally millions of migrant workers were stranded. In the end, they started walking home, sometimes hundreds of miles away with their families, their children. It's been, in a humanitarian sense, an absolute disaster in India. But it's also been an epidemiological disaster because now, across India, the cases are growing very, very fast. So in India, it's been terrible. And again, in India, what has happened is that, what we see really with this pandemic and with the lockdowns is that they've laid bare the fissures in society. So in India, it's really the working classes that have borne the burden of this. And, it's just happened in such a horrific way in India. In the same way, in the US, as you know, I need hardly explain to you, I can't believe that in New York, they started the lockdown on March 20th, when already by the first week of March, it was evident that there was going to be a major crisis. I started to self-isolate on March 8th And it wasn't until 2 weeks later that the lockdown was declared here. If they had started a lockdown 1 week earlier, now they say that some tens of thousands of lives could have been saved. And it's been really macabre here in New York. I mean, there are bodies being dumped in mass graves. There are refrigerated trucks outside hospitals where they're putting the bodies because they don't have any room in the morgues anymore. And as you know, again, it's what this pandemic has really laid bare is the deep racial divisions. Everything in the U.S. ultimately boils down to the fundamental division of race between black, brown, and white. So it's been really kind of an extraordinary thing to see, because on the one hand you have this a political structure here which seems completely indifferent to the sufferings of people, absolutely indifferent. They just don't seem to care. I mean, the president, the White House, they've just stopped talking about the pandemic as though it's over. And in fact, we know that it's going to peak now. But on the other hand, what has been very sort of wonderful to see is the Black Lives Matter movement. People pouring out on the streets, young people, old people, many young white people. And I think that's really made the pandemic into some kind of inflection point, a sort of turning point. That hasn't happened in India at all. I mean, the migrant workers didn't protest. I mean, they just bore their suffering in this stoic way. And it seems that India's political structure will not be affected at all, even though, in America, everything has changed.
Thank you for sharing with us your experience during this hard time. During this conversation, we'll be showing a little bit of videos, shots that we took with other students, where we went to the locations where the book that we studied, Gun Island, took place. We walked the road that Chinta worked with Dino, and we recorded a few passages out of the book. Now we're gonna start with the first video that is that was shot in Chiesa della Salute, not far from our university.
We should point out that there's going to be a bunch of these videos. We have Lilith Harkotsian, we have Ilaria Lizzini, and Francesca Zordan, and Busa Umar. And they're all sort of contributing as well. And they're going to be contributing questions as well in this series.
Wonderful.
La Salute has probably been painted and photographed as much as any place on Earth. Yet, it could also be said that it is a memento to a catastrophe, a memorial to the terrible afflictions of the Little Ice Age. We pause to admire the soaring octagonal church as the reflected ripples of the Grand Canal played upon its bright white surface. Your merchant would not have seen La Salute in this form, said Chinta. It took almost 50 years to build. Just to lay the foundation in the mud took many years. In the 1660s, if that was indeed when your merchant was here, he would have seen only the octagonal rotunda that supports the dome. But he would have observed the great church rising, and he would have known why it was being built. How could he not? The Venice of his time was a place where the terrible plague of 1630 was still a vivid memory.
Lovely.
We actually had a question, or technically it's my question, because I felt that as soon as I was in Venice, that I was suddenly confronted with a city that had an environmental crisis, which is funny. I come from Cairo, but I think I never was put into the precipice. And so my question is, if you could explain a little more about the environmental uncanny, and also how can you sort of situate a novel centered on the environmental uncanny away from the supernatural?
Well, the environmental uncanny is all around us all the time, increasingly. I mean, I remember Shaul telling me some time ago, in my book, one of the uncanny things that happens is this kind of spider appears. And I remember Shaul telling me that his son had been bitten by a poisonous spider and he had to take him to hospital. Similarly, so many things unfolded in this strange way. I mean, now tornadoes are striking Venice and the region around Venice. I mean, examples of the environmental uncanny are all around us. You'll remember that there's a section in the book which is set in Los Angeles, where there's a big wildfire advancing towards the museum. And that actually happened. The Getty Museum in Los Angeles was sort of encircled by a fire. But I wrote that section long before it actually happened, So it's we are living in a world where really the uncanny is all around us. It's constantly with us. It's constantly sort of, simmering around us. One of the uncanny things about this lockdown, for me, was that a couple of weeks ago, suddenly there was a cyclone heading towards my hometown, Kolkata, and I had to be on the phone with my family all the time. And then there was another cyclone heading towards Mumbai, all of this happening in this very short time. But it's interesting, you said you were from Egypt. And actually, Egypt is one of the countries that is going to be most badly affected by climate change. It already is.
Yeah.
As you must know, there's huge saltwater intrusion in the Nile Delta. There's a huge water scarcity problem in the Said.
And salination, the salination of the agricultural land.
Oh, that's a horrible thing. And, that's not new, though. That goes back 30 years. When I lived in Egypt, I lived, in a village near Damanhur. Every time the land was left fallow for more than 2 days, a thick white crust would gather. That's because, Egyptian agriculture has become completely dependent upon chemical inputs. I think Egypt is really heading for literally for a sort of economic collapse because the methods of agriculture that have been practiced there are simply not sustainable.
This is very true. I would actually want to jump in here with a question from Busa Umar, and she's sharing a question regarding the Great Derangement.
Hello, Amitav Ghosh. My name is Buse Umur. I'm from Turkey and I'm a student at Ka Foscari University of Venice. It's a great opportunity to have this conversation with you. I appreciate your being with us today. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for creating Gun Island. Apart from tackling the crisis of the planet in fiction so successfully, it feels special to read characters like me, aspiring to go to Europe, challenges of having a non-European passport, dealing with xenophobia and being the other and so forth. I read my experiences and my voice in your novel, so thank you for that. My question for you will be, in The Great Derangement, you argue that climate change has eluded the realm of fiction. But on the other hand, the pandemics have often found a place in literature. So can coronavirus pave the way to talk about climate change in literature and art for the future? What do you think?
That's an interesting question. I predicted a while ago that you're going to see a sort of avalanche of pandemic fiction. And that's already happened. Agents from New York are reporting that they're getting a sort of outpouring of submissions from writers who've been in lockdown and so on. So I do think you're going to see a lot of pandemic fiction. And, historically, epidemics and so on have resulted in a lot of literature. Italy is perhaps the best example. I mean, Italian literature is so closely tied to epidemics. I mean, first you have the example of Boccaccio, and then you have the example of Manzoni, So, in Italian literature, epidemics have had a very special place. And I think we're going to see that across the world this time. Whether this will lead to more writing about climate change, I'm not sure, but I think it will. I mean, that is happening in any case, I mean, these last few years I've noticed, especially since 2018, there's a lot more writing about climate issues. I mean, it's all around us now. Many writers are beginning to engage with these issues. Many of them are beginning to write about it. So I think there will be a lot more writing on these subjects.
No, it's very true that Venice does feature in a lot of pandemic and epidemic writing. I mean, let's just think of Death in Venice as an example of that. And funnily enough, being that Venice is a city that is multifaceted and multicultural, it's worth also sharing another video we have of a reading in Rialto Bridge.
This is the Palazzo Bembo, he said. It belonged to the family of the great poet Pietro Bembo, after whom Manutius named the Bembo Font. Exactly. Long after Pietro Bembo's lifetime, a great traveler was born into the same family, Ambrosio Bembo. He was younger than the gun merchant, but a contemporary nonetheless. In 1671, at the age of 19, young Ambrosius set off on a long journey. He traveled all the way to India and back. Sometimes I ask myself, she said, what would happen if those great Venetian travelers, De Polos, Nicola de Conti, Ambrosio Bembo, were to come back to Venice of today? Who will they have more in common with? Us, 21st century Italians, who relied on immigrants to do all our dirty work? The tourists, who come in luxury liners and airplanes? Or these ragazzi migranti, who take their lives in their hands to cross the seas, just like all those great Venetian travelers of the past?
Hello again.
Hello.
So after listening to the second reading, I work in the humanitarian field, and I couldn't but notice how true the details are in terms of the refugees and the causes that are mentioned in the book. And my question to you is, were you interested in the cause of illegal immigration from the beginning, or you decided to include it in Gun Island due to its concern and relatively to Venice? And did you have time to do lots of research? Did you listen to lots of human interest stories? And if you had the chance to meet with any of the organizations that are working actually on this cause?
Well, I became interested in this. I'm a migrant myself. I've spent my whole life traveling between places. My family was displaced from Bangladesh in the 19th century. Since then, I suppose, all my cousins are travelers. We are just displaced people trying to make a home wherever we can. So I have a natural interest in these issues. And in 2013, when I spent some time in Venice, it was arranged by Shaul. The thing that struck me very vividly was the Bengali presence in the city. It was so powerful. I mean, you could see Bengalis everywhere. I don't think other travelers in Venice see it, but me, because I'm Bengali, it was so evident to me. So I became very interested in that. And then when the European migration crisis, so-called migration crisis, I would say, started in about 2015, 2016, I noticed something which really struck me as very surprising. In all the pictures that one saw of these boats coming across the Mediterranean, I could see there were many South Asian faces, and those faces actually looked to me like Bengali faces, But that was never a part of the narrative. We've always told that that all the migrants and refugees were from Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Libya or Sub-Saharan Africa. But I could see that there were many Bengalis, Indians. So in 2016, I actually went to Italy. I established contact with a number of voluntary groups and organizations. And I traveled around Italy, meeting going to the Centri di Accoglienza and meeting refugees and so on. And it was a very interesting thing for me, because the discourse on migrants and refugees is almost completely produced by white Europeans, who don't actually know the languages of the refugees and the migrants, And I, because of my circumstances of history, I happen to speak several of the languages of the migrants. And I can tell you that the stories you hear from the migrants when they're speaking to you in their own language are in a substantial way quite different from the stories that they tell, to the state system of reception, So it was fascinating for me, and I spent a long time actually. So, in these travels, I actually met a lot of Bengalis, I met a lot of Pakistanis, and I met a surprisingly large number of Egyptians, young kids. I mean, 16, 17, and they told me stories which completely astonished me. Some of these kids were from the Said, and they told me that their parents, their fathers, had brought them to the coast, to Dumyat and Rashid, and had put them on the boats and said, go to Italy. 15, 16-year-old kids. I mean, that, as you know, within Egyptian culture, people are very attached to their children. To send them away in such dangerous circumstances tells you about the depth of the crisis that people are facing.
Thank you so much for your answer. And now we're going to move to our next question by another student, by Lilith.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to join you. I'm Lilith Karagosian from Armenia, and I've been studying at Ca' Foscari University since 2018. I should say that this course taught by Professor Bassi was one of the best courses for me. And I think that my friends will agree with me, it was quite a life-changing one. Also, I think, thanks to your great book, Gun Island, dear Amitav Ghosh. Well, I should say that for me personally, the book gave opportunity to think a lot about unfamiliar things, also to develop new ideas, and why not, to challenge my own understanding of life. And definitely for this, I'm very thankful to you. And recently I have heard that very soon there is going to be a TV series based on your Ibis trilogy. And I was wondering whether you see a similar future for Gun Island. This is my first question, and later on I'll be with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to know that you're from Armenia. Calcutta, where I'm from, has one of the oldest Armenian churches in the world. In fact, the city of Calcutta was literally founded by an Armenian who chose the site and so on. So, Armenians have a very long history in India and in Calcutta. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, Armenians are one of the original diasporic people. There's such a large Armenian presence in Venice. It's one of the connections between Venice and Calcutta. So anyway, thanks for your question. Yes, there is, the Ibis trilogy is under development for a TV series. Will it happen? I don't know, really. I mean, who can foretell anything about the world now? I just don't know if it'll actually be made, but let's see. There has been some talk about making a series around Gun Island as well. But, we are living in a world of such uncertainty that it's really not possible to predict anything about the future.
Thank you for your answer. And now we're going to move to the third reading, where we go to Campo Santa Maria Formoso, where we're reminded about Venice's role as a multilingual production of books.
As I made my way down the narrow winding streets, I remembered other details from my earlier visit to Venice. I recalled especially Cinta's presentation at the Quirini Stampaglia. She had described Venice as the publishing capital of the early Enlightenment. For the first 2 centuries after the invention of the printing press, she had said, no less than half of all the printed books in existence had been published here. Venice had been the world center of the book trade. It was here that the first printed Quran in Arabic script had appeared in 1538. Here too were published the earliest printed books in Armenian, Greek, and a variety of Slavic languages and scripts, including the Glagolithic. Haya had marveled at the ease with which that word skipped off her tongue.
So I actually am the asker of this question. My question actually had to do with the pluralism in the text, because I think when me and Noor sort of approached the text, as soon as we saw the title, Gun Island, we were like, oh, Al-Bunduqiyya, you know, we immediately knew what it was. And we sort of approached it with that familiarity. We didn't know what we were, you know, headed for, obviously, but we did approach it with that familiarity. That being said, the book is written in English, and given the language that it's written in, does it invite a sort of pluralist reading? Is it meant for everyone? Is it a book that is meant for everyone? Or does it have an intended audience? And if it doesn't, or if it does, what are the ways and the layers that you hoped readers would relate to it?
Great question. Let me say, first of all, that it's wonderful to see the Piazza Santa Maria Formosa so empty, because it's so beautiful to see Venice, you know, in this way. You guys are so lucky to be there at this time. It must be so, I mean, I keep thinking, you know, it must be so wonderful to be there now without all the tourists, to just have the place to oneself, you know. So let me ask you a question. Do you still in contemporary Arabic call Venice Al-Bunduqiyya?
Not in contemporary. We would say Venetia. But it's more or less, when I want people to sort of identify it, I would say Al-Bunduqiyya, like to tell my grandma where I am.
Ah, okay.
I have to say it.
Al-Bunduqiyya. Interesting. That is so interesting. I must say that etymological connection is so exciting and strange, you know, how it comes into being. I mean, also how it ties in with, let's say, the German, I mean, you know, Tod in Venedig, you know. Well, yes, I do think that, you know, at this point in time, I don't really have an audience in mind when I write, you know, because especially when your books have been translated a lot, you can't really have a clear sense of an audience, you know. Yeah. You just have to write for yourself. I am my audience, and my few friends and so on. That's my audience.
No, and I think it's very similar to the like Lincoln statement. You can't make everyone happy all of the time.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So I would actually like to take this opportunity to go into the next reading, which is to the next question, which is from Francesca.
Hello, I'm Francesca Zordan. I live in Italy and I study English literature at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. In Gun Island, Cinta says that the faculty of storytelling could be the last remnant of our animal selves, something that came before language when we communicated as other living beings do. My question is, how did language change the human relationship with the environment and our ability to tell stories? Thank you.
And that's a very good question. Look, I think, you know, language is not the same everywhere. And I think what changes our relationship to the world around us is not so much language as literacy. And let me put it like this, that if you look around the world, you can see that the people who had a very different relationship to their surroundings and to the worlds around them were the indigenous peoples of the New World. And one of the theories that's been proposed about that is that it was because they didn't their vision of the world wasn't constrained by literacy, and because of that, if you look at the cultures of the indigenous peoples of the New World, whether it be Australian indigenous people, or the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, or the Inuit, or the tribes of the American Northwest, or of Colombia, and so on, you can see that the world for them is alive in a way that it isn't really for the rest of the world. There's a wonderful book by a Yanomami, a shaman and political activist, who actually often visits Italy also, or has at least visited Italy. His name is Davi Kopenawa. And the book is called The Falling Sky. And he gives a very detailed account of how he sees the world, how the creatures of the world appear to him. And in that you can see that, he's able to perceive the world in a way that is really strikingly different from the ways in which most of us perceive the world. So it's often said that for the Christians who went to the New World, the question for them was whether Indians had souls, that made them human, and they were not able to answer this question. I mean, literally, that was the reason. There was a great conference convened at Valladolid in 1650, where they debated this question whether Amerindians are fully human, and they were not able to resolve it. And that was one of the things that laid the foundations for the terrible massacres and the terrible cruelties that followed. But, for Davi Kopenawa and others, it's not the question of the soul. For them, all beings have souls. It's the question, all these souls manifest themselves in different bodies. It's the bodies that are different, not the souls, which is a strikingly different way of seeing the world, I think.
Thank you so much for that answer. I wanted to launch the next reading, which actually takes place in the ghetto in Venice.
Sitting on a bench in a corner, I made an effort to imagine the square as it might have looked 3.5 centuries earlier, trying to envision it as it would have appeared to a traveler from Bengal. I tried to think of the gun merchant treading on those cobblestones surrounded by people in red and yellow headgear, the colors enjoyed on the inhabitants of the ghetto by Venetian law to mark them out as non-Christians. Warmed by the sun, I began to daydream, and suddenly the gun merchant seemed to appear before my eyes, tall, broad-shouldered, with a yellow turban, walking apparently past on some errand. He glanced at me as he went by, and his eyes were clear and untroubled. I could see why he would feel safe here, beyond the reach of Manasa Devi and the creatures and forces that she commanded. This, if any, was a place that would seem to be secure from non-human intrusion. Apart from a few ornamental trees and plants, there was almost nothing in sight that was not made by human hands. Here, surely, the gun merchant would have known himself to be beyond his tormentor's grasp. Yet here too, Manasa Devi had managed to reach him.
Okay, hello, Mr. Ghosh.
Hello.
This reading was done by Ilaria Lizzini. So I introduce myself. My name is Santiago. I'm Colombian. I am studying here in Ca' Foscari since last year. And actually, I live in the ghetto in this part of Cannaregio. So it's a very particular zone of the city. So I want to ask you, can you tell us about your experience living in Venice, living in the ghetto?
I was in Cannaregio, not exactly in the ghetto, but very close to the ghetto. And, it was a completely transformative experience for me. I mean, the strange sorts of linkages that one saw, the ghetto being a place that welcomed, or that was really founded by Jews who were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, during the Inquisition.
Yes.
And at the same time, one sees also, the ways that Bengalis are pouring in, who are displaced by something else,
Yes.
and you just have to walk out of the ghetto to, to the interior of Cannaregio to see that all the shops, the markets are all, manned by young Bengalis, So that was for me something quite extraordinary to see, and something very moving. I mean, these connections that one sees between this early modern period and today. So for me, really, I would just say that this period of Gun Island. I mean, Gun Island goes back and forth between the Little Ice Age and today, the Little Ice Age of the 17th century. And I really think, the foundations of our planetary crisis were laid in that period, the 17th century.
Yes, thank you for your answer. Really a very particular experience, as you mentioned. And you can really feel history inside that buildings, but also the contradiction with the people that you find around. So we have a next question. It's again from Lilith.
I was also wondering whether, since the publication of your nonfiction work, The Great Derangement, you found any new fiction responding to ecological and climate change? And if yes, would you briefly speak about them and also say whether you have been impressed by any of them or not? Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. My book came out in 2016, and since then there's been an absolute outpouring of fiction on ecological issues and on climate issues and so on. I think for me the most important book amongst these is a book called Overstory by Richard Powers. It's a very important book. It's actually about trees, and I think Richard Powers really goes to the heart of the matter. Really, the literary challenge of writing about these times, which is how do we give voice to the non-human? So that's very interesting. There's been a lot of writing since then. And more than that, writers have actually formed a group linked to Extinction Rebellion. It's called Writers Rebel. And for them, The Great Derangement has been a kind of foundational text, which is kind of very gratifying for me, And Writers Rebel has been they're holding demonstrations, they are supporting Greta Thunberg and, other groups like that. So yes, I think there has been a real important change within the literary community.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think for us as students, I think knowing this is also very interesting. So we have a next question done by Buse.
Hello, my other question for today is, in Gun Island, you create a connection between Venice and the Sundarbans in terms of being at the forefront of climate change. And in 2020, Venice was one of the pioneering cities that encountered the pandemic and lockdown while the cyclone Amphan hit the Sundarbans. What is required more than these critical phenomena for governments to take necessary actions? And if they can ever achieve to act, how do you think politicians, religious leaders, social organizations, and individuals should react for the future? Thank you.
Well, the connection between the Sundarban and Venice is that they are both estuarine landscapes. you know. And as I say in Gun Island, actually, it's really striking. If you take a picture of the lagoon of Venice, and it looks uncannily like parts of the Sundarban. But that's really, that is one connection. The other connection is that a lot of the Bengalis who are now in Venice are actually from that region. I mean, they're from parts of Bangladesh and West Bengal that are gradually being swamped by the sea, really, by saltwater intrusion and so on. But you know, this cyclone Amphan, which just hit the Sundarban, it's caused unbelievable devastation. I mean, the people who live there probably will never recover. You know, it's just, I mean, I'm seeing pictures, I'm talking to a lot of the groups that work over there. And I mean, it's just heartbreaking, you know. Their lands have been swamped with salt water. Their ponds, I mean, but they have no drinking water. They have to walk for miles and miles because all their drinking water has been contaminated by saline water. You know, their embankments have been breached, so their villages are flooded. It's a catastrophe, absolute catastrophe. And this catastrophe happened at a time when, you know, already there was a huge storm in 2009, which I mentioned in the book. And that had already displaced a lot of people. A lot of people had gone to work as migrant workers in other parts of India. Those people were actually returning to the Sundarban when this storm hit. And now, you know, we don't know what the impact of this will be on the pandemic. A lot of those people had to crowd into cyclone shelters and so on in crowded spaces. So what we are seeing is that two kinds of catastrophe are interacting with each other in the most disastrous possible way.
Of course, and also should be something that is appearing all around the world, that not only in Venice or in Sudan, in the Sudan verse is happening. It's for sure a global drama in some way. So with that question, we arrive to the last part of this talk. So first of all, I want to call Alia and Noor, or Noor and Alia, in camera. So first of all, we want to thank you a lot, Amitabh Ghosh, for the call. It was a very rich and rewarding conversation for us also as students. It's very nice to hear from your words the answer to the questions that we're having around the course and about the book. And also thank you for being an inspiration for us, also for the new degree that is happening in Ca' Foscari now in environmental humanities. We really hope that you will come back to our university to teach in it. And we really, really want to thank you.
Thank you, Santiago, and thank you, all of you, Noor, Alia. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to know that you know, my book resonated with all of you, and it's just wonderful to know that. And yes, I would love to come back to Ca' Foscari. I love Ca' Foscari. I love Venice. So yes, let's hope that works out.
Yes, it will be a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.